A while ago, I was browsing the Pansofa's Facebook page, the Rosicrucian tradition, and on there, some guys were asking about what are some good Rosicrucian texts, or what are some good books on Rosicrucianism. And as questions like that usually go, people then started going, well, what orders are you talking about? Are you talking about modern Rosicrucians, or are you talking about the original Rosicrucians? And then, of course, did the original Rosicrucians even exist? And this is where good old Milko Bogart stepped in and said something like, if only all Rosicrucians read this story, then things would be different. And what's the name of the story? The name of the story was something I'd never seen before. It was the words, Tlon Uqbar Orbis Tertius. And I was like, I've never seen that before. And so I looked it up, and I read this very odd short story. The story starts with two men having a discussion, and one makes a reference. And then the other asks, where did you hear that? When they look up the reference in an encyclopedia, it doesn't exist. But when one of the men go home, he looks up in his own personal encyclopedia, and there it is this article for a country called Tlon Uqbar Orbis Tertius. And of course, this place doesn't exist. This is a country that doesn't exist. And he looks for more evidence that this place existed, or what is this even reference doing here in this encyclopedia? Why is his encyclopedia different to all the other encyclopedias? And the story just kind of ends. But then there's this weird addendum that's like a scholar kind of searching for this strange world of Tlon Uqbar Orbis Tertius, and then he includes all this information of this world. It's said to have their own language, their own way of seeing the world. So no one believed that matter existed, that only everybody existed believing that only ideas were real, and what the implications were of this. But the world itself was said to be so real that it could not have been created by one man, and the implications were that it was created by a group of geniuses. So kind of like, I don't know, a reference would be like, imagine, Tolkien. He wrote Lord of the Rings, and he constructed this language, Elvish. And it's like, he constructed this entire language. But then it takes someone like Frank Herbert, who wrote Dune. And Frank Herbert was obsessed with ecology. He even got papers published on ecology. He was so obsessed with that science. And that shows in his work. So when you read Dune, and when you read things on how dunes move, and on terraforming planets and all of that, a lot of that stuff, he says, actually has real weight to it. And it's like, imagine if you got those two guys together, even though they didn't really necessarily like each other in real life. Imagine if you got those two guys to write a book together, how impossible it would be for any one man to have created that book of those two geniuses putting their minds together. And it's like, imagine a bunch of 20 guys on that level all creating one world. That's basically the implication of what Tlon Uqbar Orbis Tertius was, and that's why it confused so many people, because the articles or the writing of it was so real, but it was a hoax in the end. But the implication was still something like, because it was made by geniuses, there's still an infinite amount of insight that you'd be able to draw from it. It's almost like a form of art. And I was like, this is an interesting take. But then I was like, okay, hold on, who wrote this? And so I looked up the author, and I find a native Argentinian man named Jorge Luis Borges, who to the world merely seems to be a literary figure. However, in his spare time, Borges seemed to have an autistic obsession with researching and contemplating existence itself. Of course, this piqued my interest, so I went out and I bought his Labyrinths, and I fell in love. What I found was not just a bunch of short stories. What I found was a set of the broadest references I've ever seen. He draws from Kabbalah, from Gnosticism, from philosophy, from mystics, from history, and he embeds all of this into his short stories with this weird prose, this weird writing style. He has this style that's obtruse. It's hard to understand. And, he winds through these scenes and internal monologues and dialogues, and you kind of don't know where he's going, and it feels like you're kind of moving through a labyrinth. You don't know what's around the next corner. But it doesn't feel claustrophobic or nauseating. It's almost fun. It's like, imagine you're a kid and you stumble upon a garden labyrinth. You're with other kids, and Borges takes you by the hand, and you run and you play in the labyrinth. That's what reading his stories is like. And he takes you around, and you don't know what's around next corner, and then boom, all of a sudden the short story ends, and it's like a revelation, and it clarifies everything that came before it. But at the same time, even after you put the book down, there's still something in you that's being pulled towards it, that's being demanded to be contemplated. The stories demand you to ponder them long after you've finished reading them. Borges has this uncanny skill. It's like he's able to do in 10 pages what other authors set out to do in an entire book. Now, in the esoteric work, we usually cognize the goal as something like enlightenment, or to know capital T truth, or to know God. But what Borges offers us is a tool. In the same way that occultists do path-working exercises or mystics will contemplate scripture, these stories that Borges gives us, his labyrinths, are tools to help us ponder. His use of themes like infinity, and the nature of time and memory and immortality, all of these themes play upon us in a way that directs our consciousness towards impossibility itself. It forces us to embrace paradox, which then affects us almost in the same way that a Zen koan would. I truly think Borges desired to know God, to know the truth, to know the absolute. And this yearning is embedded as an undercurrent in all of his short stories. Of course, the Tao that can be written about or spoken of is not the real Tao, hence why Borges hides it in a labyrinth, or more precisely, constructs these labyrinths as a tool to help reach it. This is what makes Borges a Gnostic. To be a real Gnostic has nothing to do with demiurges and dualism. To be a real Gnostic merely means that you want knowledge. I think Borges was uncontent with mere belief. I think he wanted to know. And for that, he wins my friendship. Thank you, Borges. And may we meet one day on the other side of eternity.